Ever wonder what it was actually like to build a life from scratch in colonial America? Well, we're about to find out. And not from some history book, but directly from the source. We're going to hear the story of Joseph Seaver, a farmer who, way back in 1754, decided to write it all down. So yeah, we're stepping back in time through his own words. And here he is. This is our guide, Joseph Seaver. He's 82 years old, it's 1754, and he sits down to write his life story. I mean, just think about that for a second. This isn't some dry history text. It's basically a personal letter written across centuries, meant for his family, and now somehow it's reached us. You really can't get a more direct look into the past than this. All right, so let's set the scene. We're in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. The world is, well, it's on the brink of some massive changes. But for Joseph, our 82-year-old farmer, this is a moment for quiet reflection. He's looking back on a life that was just full of transformation, not just for him, but for the brand new world he literally helped build from the ground up. Okay, to really get this, you gotta understand the timeline. Joseph was born in 1672. For him, the Pilgrims landing at Plymouth Rock was closer in time than the moon landing is to us. That's wild, right? So this wasn't some ancient history class for him. It was family history. He probably grew up hearing the stories, stories about starting a new world because his own grandparents' generation had done exactly that just a few decades before. Every life has that one big turning point. And for Joseph, it came down to a simple, unchangeable fact. He wasn't the eldest son. And back then, that meant everything. The family farm, the business, pretty much the entire future. It all went to the firstborn. So, just because of the order he was born in, he was faced with this massive, life-defining choice. So he basically had two paths in front of him. Path one, stay in his hometown of Roxbury, where his big brother would inherit, well, everything, leaving Joseph to probably work for wages his whole life. Or path two, head out to the frontier, to a new settlement called Framingham. It was a huge gamble. I mean, we're talking grueling work, total uncertainty, but it held the one thing he could never get at home, the promise of his very own land. And so at just 25 years old, he made his choice. He packed up what little he had, said goodbye to his family, and headed west to Framingham. You gotta understand, this one decision, it's the engine that drives this entire story. He chose risk, he chose opportunity, over staying safe and depending on someone else. So what do? You're a young guy, you've got basically nothing but your own two hands, and you've just arrived in a brand new settlement. Where do you even start? Well, for Joseph, it was a surprisingly methodical process, and it was all built on three pillars: land, labor, and, as it turns out, love. His strategy was actually pretty brilliant. Step one, get some land. He couldn't afford to buy anything, so he leased 75 acres. Check. Step two, build a family. And this next move was, well, it was both romantic and super practical. He married his landlord's daughter, Mary. I mean, come on. That move instantly locked in his place in the community and gave him a real connection to the very land he was farming. And this is the goal, right? This is what Joseph was working towards. The word for it was a yeoman. And it's not about being some rich aristocrat. It's about being independent, a freeholder. See, if you owned your own land, you didn't have to answer to anybody. You could support your family, you could have a say in how the town was run, you had a voice. For guys like Joseph, this was the American dream, way before anyone had even come up with the phrase. All right, so now he has land and he has a partner. This is where Joseph's life's work really kicks into gear. And it wasn't just one thing, it was this decades-long grind focused on three key areas: getting more land, raising his family, and, interestingly, navigating the local legal system. This timeline here, it really tells the story of his whole strategy. It all starts with that first lease back in 1697. Fast forward 20 years, and boom, a major purchase. And notice this part. He sells his small inheritance back in Roxbury to reinvest it all in Framingham. He is all in. And get this, even at 77 years old, he's still buying land, locking down the homestead that would become his legacy. For him, land wasn't just dirt, it was security. Okay, I want to pause on this number for a second. 160 pounds. That's what he paid for that big piece of land in 1717. To you and me, that sounds like, I don't know, a nice dinner out. But back then, in colonial Massachusetts, for a farmer who literally started with nothing, this was a fortune. This single number represents years, maybe even a full decade of savings from just relentless, backbreaking work. It was a huge, huge investment in his family's future. And of course, this was never just about the land itself. It was always for his family. He and Mary had 6 kids, and they were the reason for all this work. But this also shows you the harsh reality of the time. 2 of his children, Robert and Mary, actually died before he did. He writes about this with such deep sorrow. It's a powerful reminder that his life of hard work was also filled with some really tough heartbreak. So it's really tempting to look at this and just see a simple, rustic success story, right? But was it really that straightforward? Well, Joseph's own writing and the court records he talks about, they tell a much, much more complicated story. Yeah, the court records paint a much messier picture. Life was hard. Cash was tight. He got sued for debt twice. He even got called into court for not attending church, and he basically admitted that, yeah, sometimes the farm work just had to come first. But he wasn't just a victim of the system. He was part of it. He served as a town constable, and he used the courts to collect debts owed to him, too. So he wasn't a saint. He was a real person, just trying to make his way in a pretty difficult world. So as Joseph gets into his 80s, you can feel his focus start to shift. It's less about getting more and more about preserving what he has. The big questions become, how do I make sure all this hard work actually lasts? And maybe more importantly, how do I pass on not just my property, but my values? And his last will and testament? It's really a masterclass in careful planning. First off, his wife Mary is taken care of for life. The main farm gets split between his daughter Hannah and his grandson John, which is important because that takes care of the family line from his daughter who had passed away. But then you see his sons, Robert and Nathaniel, only get 5 shillings. And that sounds really harsh, right? But he explains it right in the document. He'd already given them their share of the inheritance while he was still alive. Every single decision here was deliberate. But at the end of the day, his legacy wasn't just about the farm. In his final words of advice, you really see what mattered most to him. Work hard, deal honestly, provide for your family. But then he says this incredibly self-aware thing for an 82-year-old man looking back. He says, remember, family is more important than property. It's like he's pleading with the future generations, telling them to be kind to each other, to put that above everything else. And that brings us to his most powerful final thought. After a whole lifetime spent buying land, building, saving, he realizes the stuff, the physical things, they aren't the real legacy. The true inheritance is something you can't even touch, a good name and an honest character. What he's telling us across almost 300 years is that a life's work isn't about what you own, but who you are. And it kind of makes you stop and think, doesn't it? What are we building our lives for?